Hi, this is Matthias Hollwich from HWKN. I'm super excited to have Toby Moskowitz with me today to talk about a new project that we together work on in Brooklyn. Toby, thank you for coming. Who are you?
So I'm a daughter of Brooklyn, as I like to call myself. I'm a first generation New Yorker. My dad and my grandfather were both immigrants to this country, originally from Poland by way of Germany. And they settled in Brooklyn, actually originally in the Bronx and then ultimately in Brooklyn. So I've been coming and grew up in the neighborhoods of Williamsburg, East Williamsburg and Bushwick, and have spent the last 10 years working with at least 7 of them working with Matthias and his firm, building beautiful buildings and really thinking through sophisticated architecture as it relates to a historic neighborhood and transformations of how people work in the new economy.
But the project that most people associate with you and also with us is actually 25 Kent. Can you tell us a little bit about this project?
So, you know, I remember, I think pretty early on, Matthias, you stood with me on this half-empty lot with some equipment, construction equipment in our view. Matthias and I stood on this lot, waterfront in Williamsburg. And, you know, I had this vision for a building that would be old and new. So would tap into the architectural history of the neighborhood. My family's business started literally across the street, but also bring forth a new vision for what a warehouse and an office building look like in a new neighborhood. And Matthias and I met, I don't know if you remember the story, it was late on a December weekend, you know, like a week or so before Christmas. And your office was pretty quiet. We had a deadline to present to the Department of City Planning. And I learned, it was the first time I used the charrette process, which Matthias has made me a huge fan of. And we had these images of pieces of buildings sliding around the table. And this beautiful piece of art that's functional and, you know, speaks of innovation, but also really is deeply rooted to the history of architecture in the neighborhood, was born of that evening.
Yeah, and I still remember you actually had under your arm a couple of other drawings from other architects who had done proposals for the site. And you very provocatively came to us and said, like, look, this is what your colleagues have done. Can you do something better? So it was a huge challenge.
So let me ask you a question, Matthias. You know, you have this woman shows up. I hadn't been in the real estate business that long, with this, you know, crazy idea for a new kind of warehouse that would work for, you know, companies looking for floor to ceiling windows. So this old and new, tapping into these phenomenal Manhattan views for market for office space in a world where it had never existed. Nothing had been built in Brooklyn. You know, where did this building come from? I dreamed of it, but you made it happen. So tell us where it came from.
Yeah, I think what we always enjoyed, or what I enjoy so much about working with you, is that there's a provocation, right? Challenging about thinking differently about architecture, but then also an experiential component where you and I just walked through Brooklyn. And you pointed out all the elements that you felt are key to the future of this place. And then in a workshop that we created, which was really about more design thinking than architecture at that point, very quickly in the dialogue emerged like an idea, a vision like this. So it was really like rapid prototyping. Interestingly enough, for me, I always had a frustration with buildings which were generic and buildings that become too kind of international style. I always felt that buildings should really be rooted in its locality. And I think with this was almost like a melt of minds that happened in this building's design where you and I came together.
And I think what's so interesting is, you know, when I approached you, Matthias, if you remember, you know, we used to talk about fame, fortune, and fun. And we're small local developers. So, you know, it always was that the fun and the fame had to supersede the fortune. You know, we really, and I've worked with many architects over the years, we really have understand each other. I think an architect-client relationship is one of understanding and chemistry. But what I'm a traditionalist at heart. I build my residential buildings out of brick. There's certainly a lot of brick. You know, your firm is known for a modern, very contemporary approach. And I think the beauty of what we've created, and we could talk about the design for 215 more, Bushwick Generator in a moment, comes from that two different styles, two different perspectives. You know, I'm a nice Jewish girl from Brooklyn. You know, you come from Germany, very international perspective. You built in Berlin and you built in Jerusalem. And really very different perspectives, very different approaches. And it all speaks through in 25 Kent, the building that exists, and also the design of the Bushwick Generator, because to build something that's classic, but also look contemporary, takes a real visionary and an artist. And I came to you with some concepts and what the soul of the building was supposed to be, but you really made it a reality. And, you know, 25 Kent is standing, and every time I started running past it, and sometimes I bike past it, I often drive past it, it speaks to you in its elegance. And you see it from the FDR Drive as well. The proportionality mixed with the disproportionality. So it's, you know, it's irregular, but it's also uniform. It uses brick in a way that's gentle, that tells you it was built, you know, in this era, but also is respectful of the history of industrial buildings around it. And, you know, has a real voice, which oftentimes is missing in architecture, and certainly in contemporary architecture. And this is very much a contemporary building, you know, with elements of traditional architecture wrapped in. So I don't know if you remember, Matthias, the first time I showed you around Bushwick. And I know that, I don't know if you've moved there yet, but I know it's become a place you love to bike and spend some time. And we put a lot of time into, you know, working together and exploring the neighborhood and really thinking through a whole different set of challenges. 25 Kent was a full square block, you know, wider angles around it. So you saw this beautiful, you know, facade from all sorts of angles, but much more grand approach. Whereas the Bushwick Generator is on a side street, narrower access points. So, you know, needed and more complicated, not a full square block, neighbors on two sides. You know, what spoke to you from the neighborhood, the history, its present, that led you in this direction to a building that's as beautiful as 25 Kent, you know, even in a moment when the inputs are way more complex?
It really started when you took me on a tour through Bushwick, and we went into many different stores, and I still remember that you served me incredible chocolate.
The fine and raw is still there.
Absolutely, absolutely fantastic. And by seeing the site, what is actually really interesting, that you already planted a DNA in it, because you do own a couple of warehouses, and you already started to establish incredible creative ventures in these warehouses. And the difference here is really at 25 Kent, we have a waterfront, we have the view towards Manhattan, and also the connection that became more clear that we wanted to create between Y Street and towards the waterfront. And what emerged here, it's a different strategy. And maybe I'm just gonna go a little bit further in our presentation here. I think the aim is kind of similar in terms of using the Brooklyn character and really creating a neighborhood-based innovation. And what we now developed here is this idea of respecting the warehouse dimensions of the industrial scale, which is 2 to 3 stories as a plinth. But then we're adding a high-tech component to it. But we are making sure that actually the main body of the building is distinct towards the base of the building. So when it lands, you have really 2 different elements, the base and the tower. And the tower, we allowed ourselves to really shape it into a recognizable form, where at 25 Kent, we have the canyon and we have the basically the open cut with the facade. Here becomes the kind of shaping of the angles. And this is how it looks right now, right? So that we yet have a contextual building, but which through its geometry, it becomes very distinct and it has an incredible character. And we have seen it actually in our conversations with the city through the ULIP process, that there is immediately an emotional response from a lot of people that we have presented this project to.
And, you know, I would comment, you know, just on that idea that, you know, when one is going through a public process where there's so many stakeholders, their potential tenants, their city agencies, their community members. The requirement, which sometimes is like icing on the cake when a building tells a story, a really core component of success is being able to tell the story. And I think for me, what's a really critical ingredient in your work, Matthias, is 25 Kent had a very simple message. And while the Bushwick Generator building is more complicated, it also has a very simple message. And what was fascinating was when we hired the landscape design firm that you recommended to us, a very cool young firm out of Philadelphia, off of a few hours of walking the neighborhood, they were able to put forth a design that tied in so brilliantly to what you put, to your design and the concept for the use of the space, because the building has a voice, the design has a voice, and it's a combination, the use of geometric patterns, which is similar to in both buildings, overlaid on top of brick. It's a physical voice and it's an emotional, and it's a soul that comes forth. And I think that was very impactful in our engagement with the city initially with 25 Kent, and then again here with the Generator.
Yeah, and the firm we're working with, it's a Land Collective, right, with David Rudin, and we have worked with him before at the Innovation Center, which was an incredible collaboration with them. And I totally agree with you. They immediately got the essence. They started to really enhance the design intent through the landscaping and also public access components.
Yeah.
And that is something what is also so fascinating by going through this process with you, when a ULIP process gives us actually as architects at the beginning much more freedom, because in dialogue with you and then also the city, a lot of rules are going to be imposed onto a site that can be informed by the design. So in this case, we see that mid-block, we have actually all the windows looking towards Manhattan here, where normally you would maximize the volume, you would push it towards the neighboring plots, and with this you would have firewalls, and you would not have all of these kind of openings, right? So it's a very interesting process to go through, which I believe gives us actually as architects potentially more freedoms and more creative authorship on a building like this.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the programming, some of the work we've done, and then how you've translated that into physical space. So about 3 years ago, as Matthias, as you referenced, we opened up. First, we had two amazing tenants, and one is a artificial intelligence company, the other is a Spanish language marketing company. And we also work with the local nonprofit Sun to open up really a community space where we've done all sorts of internship programs. We've created collaborations with the tech industry, and that's been going on for quite a long time. So in 25 Kent, when we first built the building, we were very cognizant of a new industry, of bringing workspace and tech into what was very much a residential community. And we cut open the building, and we made that interior street, I think you used to call 12.5 Street, to really communicate that we were open. We had the glass in the center of the building, so everything was transparent, and it was sort of seamless with the street. And here we're dealing with a very different dynamic, because we've had really years to develop this relationship with the community and help them understand. At one point we were running something called the Bushwick Blockchain Collective, and really educating young people in the housing projects across the street from us. So there are thousands of kids in the neighborhood who know who we are, know what we're trying to do. So here the design actually reflects that, and the building is going to reflect that. It's much more enclosed. There's open access, so you can come in and you could join our world, but they're labyrinths of streets. And that Land Collective pulled that in as well in the design of the landscape design, whereas it's almost like hidden gardens on the base of the building, above the 3-story base of the building, because it's not as transparent, it's not as open, it's a little more mysterious, but everybody knows the door is open and you're welcome to come into our world. So it's another example, I think, of how, even without me saying this to you, your firm and you, Matthias, understood where the market was up to, what the challenges were from a tenanting perspective, and really pulled that into the physical design and engaged with the community in that way. Now, the other thing I wanted to draw everyone's, the conversation to is this, when we first started this, if you remember, this goes back to like 2013 with 25 Kent. It was way before, really early in the day of shared workspace.